Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to another episode of Beyond Diversity with the Center for Racial Reconciliation at Mack College. I am pleased to have with us today Dr. Grady S. Mack McCarter III, the founder and coordinator of Community Renewal International in Shreveport, Louisiana. In May 2019, Dr. McCarter received his honorary doctorate degree and was inducted into the President's Hall of Distinction, acknowledging his leadership and mission in the building of community. He's an ordained minister of the Disciples of Christ Christian Church denomination. Mack McCarter has pastored churches in Texas for nearly 2 decades before he began his pursuit of building community renewal. In 1991, he returned to his hometown of Shreveport, Louisiana, to develop a method for renewing lives in whole cities by restoring the relational foundation upon which all communities rest. With the unmatchable support of his wife, Judy, along with his many friends and patrons, Community Renewal International was launched. So I'm pleased to have with us today our distinguished guest, Mack McCarter. So thank you, Mack, for being with us.
Nathaniel, it's truly my joy and pleasure. I love the Nyack family, and I'm honored to be here and love being with you, my brother.
Thank you. So, looking forward to this conversation today. So, there's a crazy world that we're living in, and we've seen with these times or so. And in our world today, the word community is used very casually. I know that you deeply believe in building stronger communities through caring. Can you tell us about where that journey began for you and where God began to lay this on your heart?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that question, because that's a question that I'm not asked much, and I'm delighted to share the answer, because I had the great grace of God to be born to 2 parents who fully understood within the confines of the Christian faith, it's how large it truly is. And that is, if you're gonna bear the mantle of Christian, then it must be your understanding that every single human being is precious in the sight of God. So they instilled that very deeply in me, and that was so critical, because I was born and reared in Shreveport, Louisiana, and 1945 was my birth. And then all the way through to 1963, when I graduated from high school, Shreveport was a radically segregated community. Schools, parks, stores, restaurants, it was the archetype of segregation. As a matter of fact, some years later, I had a friend named James Farmer, who was the founder of the Congress on Racial Equality. And it was during the great civil rights heyday. And I asked him, when are you coming to Shreveport? And he said, Mack, we think that Shreveport is a harder nut to crack than Birmingham, Alabama. So that gives you an idea of the terror that was omnipresent in persons' lives if you were born with black skin and lived in Shreveport, Louisiana, as well as many other places across the South, in that stark day of racial inequality. We live in a much more subtle day, which is nonetheless devastating. However, by having that plumb line of God's love for the preciousness of his children deeply planted within me from my earliest memories, that plumb line gave me the eyes to see social inequity everywhere and how it was not right. And so also what God put to birth within my life was this burning desire that we must truly be one. And that's what took me into the ministry, because we can't pray, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, right here, right now by me, and make any other claim. And so that was the calling on my life. And the only way I could interpret that was to go into the ministry, and pastor churches. But that got me ready for kind of a vision to be able to effectively go to the streets rather than spend my life trying to inspire people within the pews. Nathaniel, I would always tell everybody to go forth. And at the end of our services, and they all went forth, but I never figured out where forth was because when they came back the next Sunday, they all looked the same, and the world hadn't changed. So I had to end up going forth to find out where forth was.
Wow. So that kind of leads us into the next question. And I wanted to ask you, can you tell us how friendships help us to overcome racial divides and fear? How has that worked personally and
Wow. Yeah. Well, I consider friendship to be the most profound theological reality in this universe. We think of Abraham as the friend of God, and we think of God wanting to be friends. It's one thing to have children. It's a great thing when your children grow to the age where they become your friends. And that's a whole sign of maturity. And that's the whole quest of God, is to grow us to the place that we walk together with him. And that's what the word reconciliation means. The root of the Latin derivation, means again, and con means with, and cilia is the Latin for feet. We walk together again. And that's the great quest of God. So friendship to me is the most profound theological reality, but it's also the reality of all life. And we stop and think about that. How do you become friends? And I didn't realize that I was signing on to be interviewed in a series called Beyond Diversity. I love that. Yeah. That's so powerful, because honestly, we've got to celebrate our diversity. We've got 9 billion diverse, unique creations of God walking this planet. So if you really, really want to get down to diversity, go ahead, and it goes all the way down to, to 9 billion of us. We're diverse. We happen to have certain classes like male, female, certain ethnicities, et cetera. And then we go ahead and divide that off. But fundamentally, there is that fundamental diversity, but it's transcended by a fundamental unity. If you are living and breathing and walking around in a human body, you have a human soul. And so no one, if you're Homo sapiens, man, you're in the club. And so here's how do we, it's almost, you think about, like, how do 2 porcupines ever get together to make to make love? And when we think about coming together, and transcending our diversity, God has put here ways for that to happen. And one of the ways is when Jesus said to his disciple, "You're my friends." Hesiod said, "Friends and neighbors come to your aid when even your relatives dawdle over their gear." So I want to just stop and say this for just a minute. I can remember in the 1st grade, I remember there was a kid in my class that had the reddest hair I ever saw in my life. I mean, if you could think of putting orange Crayolas on a guy's hair, and that was it. This was Tommy Watts. And when I first saw him, all I saw was red hair. I didn't know him. Then we matriculated all the way from 1st grade all the way through high school together. And Tommy Watts then we became fast friends because we did what friends need to do. We shared things together in common. We played together, we ran together, we worked together in athletics, we studied together. He became my friend. Well, I never thought about his red hair.
Mhm.
I did when I didn't know him. But when I did know him, well, he was Tom Watts. He happens to have red hair. So what? I didn't, of course you see his red hair, but it isn't all you see.
Right.
Because what friendship did is it made the red hair, not only secondary, tertiary, it moved it off the map. Of course he had it, but I never thought of red hair. Tom and red hair, never did.
Right.
And so when I moved back to Shreveport in 91, and this was an incredible lesson for me of friendship. I visited, I had just been here, and the Lord laid it on me to visit this large Black church, Black Baptist church. And heck, I didn't even want to be Baptist, much less, Black Baptist, but the Lord wanted me to visit because the pastor had walked with Martin Luther King and was a big time civil rights leader in Shreveport during some tough times, Dr. Harry Blake. And I visited the church, and it was one white fella with 2,000 Black folks, and then at the close of the service, the Lord said, "You join this church." And I told him, "No, everybody's gonna, man, I hadn't talked to my wife. Everybody's gonna think I'm a spy and all that stuff." And God just said, "You don't have faith." And I went, "That's a low blow, God." Meanwhile, they're singing "Just As I Am." So I go forward and join this church. No one more reluctantly did. It took me 3 days to tell my wife what I'd done. And I just said, "Pass the ketchup." I joined Mount Canaan, and God did the same thing to her 6 months later. Well, this was God's way, and we became friends. And it was the most astonishing thing. 16 years later, that was in 1991. 16 years later, I'm walking down the hall in on Black History Month, and the youth department had put up a big poster that said, "African American leaders who have helped our people." And my picture was on there because our color stopped, and we went beyond diversity to a unity. I cried all the way home after saying, I'm getting a little emotional now, but that's the place of friendship. And you do the things, there are rules to be friends. There's certain things you have to do to be friends, and certain things you must not do to be friends. Certain things you got to say, certain things you must never say. And if you do, then friends forgive one another. Right. Friends stick closer than brothers. And that is the fundamental thing when we begin to look at one another, not for red hair, but with the conviction, I want to be friends. And you'll do the things to be friends. And so we move beyond diversity. I'm sorry for the length of the answer, but it is so profound to stop and think. I always think where it said, and the wolf and the lamb shall lie down together. Well, that doesn't ask anything of the wolf except change your appetite. It asks everything of the lamb. And my race has been the wolf historically to the Black race. And here are these Black youth. Here's a Black church that welcomed me. It didn't ask hardly anything of me. It asked everything of them to trust. And it just is so humbling. But it's the stuff of friendship. And when we think of Jesus's disciples in this age of separation and division and disconnection and all of the disses, and you think of Simon the Zealot, he was sworn to kill Romans, period. And here's Matthew, who got his check from Rome every week. And here they came together, and experienced a unity within the love of God. Now that's something.
Yeah.
And that's something that we can. Jesus sang about a Roman centurion. Not in all Israel have I seen this kind of faith. That's something.
Yeah. Amen. Question I wanted to ask you is, how have you earned the trust of people in your community, especially when there can be, an amount of cautiousness sometimes, and because of the racial divide in the South? And how have you addressed some of those difficult topics, like when you have a tragedy happen in a community? Like how have you addressed some of those topics?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I spent my years preaching, really pounding on people. We've got to move from the seats to the streets. And, so I'd pound them every week, and they enjoyed it as much as I did. It was kind of like going out the way I used to hunt. I'd go out and shoot my shotgun, and, there'd be a loud roar, and there's a lot of smoke and explosion, but I never hit anything. So the animals enjoyed it just as much as I did. so we're out that, and so I would pound people, but I had no idea how to move outside the walls of the church. When God brought me back home, it was to a Shreveport that I didn't know, where there was gangs and drugs and stuff. And God laid it on me to go down to one of the toughest streets, Lawrence Street. And if you know the South, you know what we call shotgun houses. They're like row houses. And here were all the row houses, big gang activity. And he said, I want you to go down there. And you kept talking about love your entire ministry. And you need to know that love works, and that it's the greatest power. And I didn't know if it really did work, but I'd preached about it. And so God just said, go down there and make friends. Well, I didn't go down there on Friday night because that would not be wise. I went down there on a Saturday morning, about 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, when I figured out that the bad guys would be real hungover and I could maybe live. And so the very first time that I went down there, I drove down there, and I turned on Lawrence Street, and I went, well, I'm going to die. And then I thought, well, I'll just do a drive-by. There have been drive-by shootings. And I said, I'll do a drive-by blessing, just bless you. But God wouldn't fall for that. He just said, you stop the car. I stopped it and got out, and all these little kids came running up. And so I grabbed them up in my arms. And it wasn't simply to hug them. I just figured that these folks are not going to shoot their own kids, and I'm going to be safe holding on to these babies. And so I went up and knocked on doors, and I just said, I'm Mack McCarter. And there's a group of us that believe if we'll get to be friends, that God can change our city. And not a lot of doors open at first, but listen to this. I went back every Saturday at 10 o'clock. And in 3 months' time, the people were largely sitting out on their front porches. I didn't go with the 4 spiritual laws. I didn't go with the big Bible with the zipper cover. I didn't do that. I was a walking word. I was there to make friends and to love them. And they were there in 3 months. They were there waiting for their friend to come. The consistency of simply getting to be friends. I had no agenda except to be friends, to get to know them and them to know me. It took them about 6 months to say, why are you coming down here? Then I could give them some good news, because God loves you. And so do I. And I had amazing things happen to me. I had my life saved by one of our drug dealers, that lived in one of our houses with one of the gangs. I could tell a lot of stories, but here's what I learned. I learned that love and friendship overcome the racial divide. I was white. they were Black. I know that love and friendship overcame our economic and socioeconomic divide. You know, I was very wealthy compared to my friends down there in the bottoms. I learned that love can overcome being a stranger. I was a stranger, but if I kept going back all the time with no agenda, I'm not getting to be your friend in order to. When we treat people as a means to something, that is the fundamental idolatry of life. That violates everything that God has created us to be. We must understand that our relationships are ends in themselves. I am not ever getting to be friends with you in order to.
Right.
And so that's manipulation. And then I saw where love overcame fear. I was totally unafraid. And still to this day, I go down into the bottoms area at night. I mean, totally unafraid because I know everybody and they all know me and we're friends. And those are the weapons of our warfare that have divine power to demolish strongholds. And we've got to unleash love, but we can only unleash it by walking it into the streets of the city. And it's got to be God's love. It's not our love. We have to be obedient. I'm sorry, I started preaching.
Oh, that's good. That's good stuff.
I get excited about this, Nathaniel.
Let me ask you this question. What kind of influence and impact did, knowing that we just celebrated Martin Luther King Day this past week or so, what kind of influence and impact did Dr. Martin Luther King have on you as an individual and in the work that you do today?
Well, again, another fundamental question. Normally I only get, I'm a 1 or 2 question interview for an hour because I go on and on and on, but we'll try to get more than that in. But here is what happened to me when I was 18 years old. Of course, at 18, it's 1963. It's in my last semester of high school, and King had started his work in the late 50s. He had come to Shreveport several times, his work in Shreveport really, really faltered again because the NAACP had been outlawed in Shreveport. It was against the law to be in Shreveport, to be a member of the NAACP. I'm telling you. And so I'm 18 years old. I'd had my wisdom teeth out. I'm on the couch. I'm home from school, trying to take care of the pain in my jaws. And King had been thrown in jail. This was in April, I think, of 63. He was in the Birmingham jail where he wrote the letter. Mm-hmm. And so I'm watching the TV. They break in, and it is showing the news of a march on Kelly Ingram Park in Birmingham, and it is led by these 3 pastors who are in their liturgical robes, and they come around the corner, and it was the March of the Children, because as I've read about it later, the strategy was to try to reach the heart of white America. So they had the children, and they turned the corner, and there they faced the long lines of the police and the firemen. Their fire hoses were set on a setting that, quote, would strip the bark from trees and the mortar from bricks. And there were all the dogs that were lined up. And I'm watching, and those 3 pastors knelt in the street and on their knees, and the children walked forward.
Wow.
And all hell broke over them. And I was absolutely sobbing. And I was there on the couch alone, and it became known as the Battle of Birmingham, just to go to a park that was considered a white park. And it changed. Let me say, it didn't change the fundamentals of my life. It took those fundamentals and operationalized them. It wasn't simply love in the abstract. It was that we too must now march love into the streets of the city. Years later, I have to tell you this, in 1995, I had a dear friend named Nelson H. Smith, N.H. Smith. Nelson Smith was one of the three pastors when he was 33 years old that knelt in that deal. The other was A.D. King. It was Martin Luther King's brother. And then John Porter, who was also a pastor there in Birmingham. And NH was one of those pastors, one of the most brilliant guys I've ever known, one of the greatest preachers. And he had invited me in 95 to preach it. We were friends to preach in his church. So I'd preach for Friends and Family Day. And we were walking. When you go to Birmingham now, Kelly Ingram Park is a part of the Civil Rights Museum. So you go to the museum, then you walk through that park, and they have bronzes of dogs. And so you get just a sense of that. And so we're walking through the park, and we come to the statue of the three kneeling pastors, because an AP reporter had gotten a picture of that. It went worldwide. And there's my friend NH, who I'm standing beside, mm-hmm. who's there in marble. And NH said to me, Mack, a movement must never change from something to heal into something to win. We set out to heal the hearts of white America, not to win our rights, because we knew that only through healing the heart of white America could we then truly win. And if it does change from something to heal into something to win, you neither win because you build resistance, because there always has to be a loser. You neither win, nor if you do win, quote unquote, you never heal. And God has called us into this ministry of reconciliation, walking together again. God walked with Adam in the cool of the evening, and then Adam said, I don't want to walk with you anymore. And then the whole Bible is God pursuing us to be able to walk with us again. And it ends up there in Revelation, you remember, where it said, then I saw a new heaven and new earth, and a city descending. So where we walk together again. So
thank you for that.
King had a profound impact on my lives and the lives of many, many folks, many millions of us. Yeah. But, a truly good man does not want his ego worshiped. A truly good man wants his cause followed. And we substitute ego worship because it's a lot easier to do that than to follow the cause.
Yeah. That's so good. Question I have for you is, people who do the work of racial reconciliation realize the importance of rejoicing with those who rejoice and mourning with those who mourn. What has that been like for you in your setting?
Yeah. Well, of course, that's fundamental to us because it speaks of the empathic heart. And until we can feel what others feel, even to get a sense of that, and that awakens in us you don't reach the will of a person except through the emotions. And you're not going to usually mobilize folks on an intellectual basis. It is his own, I feel this. And that's the best door to the will, to mobilizing the will that there are. And I do have to say this, it's a lot easier for us to mourn with those who mourn than it is to rejoice with those who rejoice, just because we're human beings. And as the guy said, it's not enough for you to win, but your best friend must also fail. But the scripture talks about Jesus being the first fruits of a great harvest. A great harvest of what? A great harvest of human beings that fill this earth, who feel with one another. And the empathic civilization is the goal of creation. That's how we come to maturity, is to truly, say that the children that have been ripped from their mother's arms at our borders, those are my children. Those are my grandchildren. And that's what then, that's how a little child leads us. Anybody that's a grandparent, when that first grandchild is born, holy cow, everything changes. And then you've got to realize, don't ask me about my grandbaby. Ask me about the grandbabies of this world. And that becomes our quest. That's why we're here. I don't know any other reason to live except to give heart, soul, mind, and strength for the kingdom of God to come on earth as it is in heaven. I don't know any other reason to live. And so that calls for mourning with one another and rejoicing with one another. It has to be there, that people's pain becomes my pain and people's joy becomes my joy, regardless. And when we keep that goal in mind, then it is the essence of true joy. That city set on a hill, that, as it says in Hebrews 11, these all died not having received what was promised. Mm-hmm. Holy cow. But having glimpsed it from afar. And by able to glimpse it, then we can walk in joy in this life, knowing that we're working to grow it, this new today into a new tomorrow.
No, Mac, when I think about 2020, it was a tough year worldwide for a lot of people. But when I think about it in particular to America, we've had, I think we're up to a count of over 400,000 deaths with COVID or so. So during this pandemic, in 2020, we've also saw racial injustice. We also saw a lot of political unrest or so. So what gives you hope in the midst of the dark times that we are facing as we are walking into 2021?
Yeah. Well, I've really come to the place where my faith is a fairly simple faith. I have faith that love works and that love will win. That is the composition of my faith. And it is, despite the empirical, historical evidence that love doesn't work and that love will not win. And yet there is evidence, of course, that it does and that it will win. And so you choose to say, this is, though the darkness is here, Habakkuk says, though the fig tree does not blossom. You read that powerful testimony in Habakkuk, yet will I love the Lord. And so you see all of the horror that we have created by our own self-will and sin with one another. But you also see the possibilities out of which this can rise. And Jesus always talked about seeds. He always talked about the vital as against the massive. And and so Paul didn't make headlines when he lived. He lived and died, and I promise you, he didn't make any headlines. Nero made all the headlines. But now people name their dogs Nero and they name their sons Paul. And it is, with that hope that we live, because our hope is not in our own power. Our hope is in he who holds the reins of eternity in his hands. So it's a time of great opportunity because, I've been at this deal called community renewal now officially since 94, but since 1981 when the vision seized me. And when you talk about that we have to restore the relational foundation and the relational infrastructure that holds things together. When I started saying that in 1994, it was about as exciting to people as watching the guacamole dip turn black at a party. I mean, it wasn't real exciting. And now people are saying we must restore. We are divided. We must bring unity. We must restore unity and come back together. And how do we do it? Well, we've incubated a model here in Shreveport, Louisiana, where we have 50,000 plus people who are together, black, white, brown, rich, poor, young, old, and believe it or not, Republicans and Democrats and independents and everybody in between, because we're united in one purpose, and that is we must care for one another. So that gives me hope.
As you talk about this or so, I think January 6th is a day that's going to be edged into our minds for a long time or so.
It should be, yeah.
What were you thinking on January 6th when you saw the riots break out at the U.S. Capitol?
Yeah. Well, like everyone else, I was in profound shock. But also, as many have said, that what you sow, you're going to reap. And if you sow to the flesh, you're going to reap from the flesh. And those of us that know the power of words, because we can say sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will kill you. And those of us that know the power of words could easily see that you cannot keep sowing into the mind and the heart of human beings what you're sowing in terms of discord and hatred and division, that there is a consequential result that comes from that kind of sowing. It had always been a mystery to me how the most educated nation, sophisticated nation in all of Europe went Nazi. And to be very frank, that mystery is no longer extant, and it's very clear how it happens. And so, just the horror. I've had to fight terrible anger, but I will tell you that if you keep a fool from his folly, you people the world with fools. And we know as Christians, if you keep a sinner from the consequences of his sin, you will go on and on and on. And there has to be judgment and justice. There has to be accountability, and there has to be the plumb line of authority that is laid down that prohibits Now, the sowing of those kinds of seed, we did that with Nazi Germany. We've got to chase down every criminal that violated that. King clearly said, if you are disobedient, you must pay the price of your disobedience. That's why he went to jail peacefully, even though he was protesting unjust laws. And so there has to be the consequences for that. I mean, we're still chasing war criminals from Germany, but we have to move into the arena of becoming more than conquerors. We conquered Germany and Japan, but we're more than conquerors because Germany became our greatest. You're more than conqueror when you make your enemy your ally. Mm-hmm. And Japan is our greatest ally in Asia, Germany our greatest ally in continental Europe. Why? We brought justice, we brought authority, we prohibited the Nazi Party was prohibited. You can't keep growing that because it's going to lead to this. And that has to happen. This can be, to me, the death rattle of white supremacy. We have years to go, but we better lay down everything that moves us to be more than conquerors so that we can be allies and friends. There has to be accountability, there has to be authority, and then we have to do the things necessary to reach out to one another. But those two things, we cannot have reconciliation without justice, period.
Right. When we think about, like when we think about white supremacy, and of course we've seen it growing in our country, what can we do, I guess, as a nation to begin to show that diversity in our country is not a threat, but it's a strength?
Right. Well, that's a great question. Shreveport integrated their schools over one weekend. In other words, you went to your high school on Friday, and then they totally integrated every school, elementary, secondary, and all secondary schools. After the next Monday, you might have gone to a different school. All of a sudden, radically segregated kids and teachers, they had a plan where over one weekend, everybody integrated. Bang, everybody was put together. Well, there were fights like crazy, on the baseball, during recess, all this stuff. But authority was leavened. If you get a hold of people's behavior, you can change their feelings, because feelings always follow behavior. You begin to act right, you'll begin to feel right. And so they level that authority, and bang, now that created the environment then for growing new plants of harmony. And then you invest in that with all kinds of intentionality. You have to do the things necessary to be friends. So we have to apply to root out white supremacy. And the real threat, we're going to knock down. I mean, you got the army now involved, but the real threat is the subtlety of white supremacy in our attitudes. And that can only be grown out. That's the leavening process of the love of Jesus. And that's done. I don't know if you saw last night, Celebrate America. Well, you can't watch that and not feel great about America. But that was only an hour and a half, and you've got cable news going 24/7, pounding. And what is news is not how we care for each other. What's news is our bad behavior. And so what we've got to do is part of the growing of new lives, there has to be a vision, the habitual vision of greatness, as Whitehead said. And so there's much to do there. But first, we have to now come in with the police, et cetera, and authority, and say, you will not behave this way. That's what they did on the playgrounds. And then I was at my high school, and they have had like 9 straight black homecoming queens at my old high school that was, and the kids are there with all one spirit, black and white. As a matter of fact, the young man that won the Pulitzer Prize for poetry graduated, Jeremiah Brown. I knew him as Trey Demery because he's in my church, but he won the Pulitzer Prize this last year, and he graduated from Byrd High School. And he said, "I love Byrd High School." So, but we have to get behavior right, because feelings follow behavior, and then we've got to feed the right feelings. We can't feed ourselves. It's like, Nathaniel, there inside of you and me are two wolves. One wolf is ravenous, as Jesus said. It's the wolf of self-centeredness, and it's there, and it's ravenous for self. It'll eat everything in sight for self. I'm fundamentally self-centered. That's my sin. I can't change me. That's why I need a savior. But there's another wolf, and that wolf hungers and thirsts for connection with my brothers and sisters. Now, which wolf is going to win? It's going to be the one we feed, and we got to feed the right wolf. Dadgum, I keep preaching.
No, we love it. We love it. Well, here's our last question for you today. What do you see as some practical ways in which we can begin to see some healing? We can, I guess as healing comes or so, there's also got to be repentance. There's also got to be repair for unity to come about or so. So what do you see as some practical ways that we can start to bring that about in our society?
Right. Well, I have a rule, and that is that I've had my last argument. That doesn't do anything. Mm-hmm. And B, I am only going to give of myself to willing people. Jesus preached to the crowds, but he invested himself in his disciples. They're the ones that he was teaching. Mm-hmm. And there are ways to see that willingness. And so I'm going to only move with the willing. You got some hardcore folks out there. Well, we're going to grow a crowd that's going to be so good. I asked the local sheriff here, what's the biggest gang in Shreveport? He says about 26. And I said, I want to meet the gang leader, and I want to invite him to come to Independence Stadium. We have the Independence Bowl here in Shreveport. Seats 55,000. I want to invite him to come to Independence Stadium in 2022 I want him to bring all of his 26, because we're showing up with 55,000. We're the biggest gang in town. We just don't know who we are. So we have to begin to have a way in which willing people rise and become visible. And that's why we started the We Care team. Just sign up, get a bumper sticker, everything, get a sign, and become visible, so we can get a lapel pin. We can begin to recognize each other over our diversity, because we're commonly committed to this high calling. So that's one practical way. The second thing is systematize getting to know your neighbor. We email people all over the world, and now in today's world, we don't know who's living and dying on the same apartment floor, or on the same street. So get to have a party, start getting to know and get reconnected. And then, give yourself to everything that can begin to take this seed and leaven it. The kingdom of heaven is like a woman who took a little bit of leaven and put it in a large amount of dough, until all the dough was leavened. Think of those parables of Jesus. It's the seed growing secretly. So we have to make friends, but we've got to systematize that friendship, because all of us are caring. We're just caring individually and in isolation from one another. And that's the reason we have a bumper sticker that says, Caring alone won't heal our world, but caring together will.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Thank you, Mac.
Oh, Nathaniel, listen, bless anybody that is going to listen to this interview. They're more brave than I ever was.
No, I know our students, our faculty administration is going to be extremely blessed by it, or so, and I think that it'll put people on the road or so to saying that, you know, if Matt can do this and follow Jesus in this kind of way, I can commit my heart in that way too.
That's the key. If it can happen in Shreveport, Louisiana, y'all, where we've got unity, loving unity, it can happen anywhere. And so I just say this, a simple act, but put it into a system. That means all of you together can solve a sophisticated problem. You know, the old starfish thrower, well, he's not going to be able to throw 10,000 starfish back. And that, you know, we all know that story. It mattered to that one. That's right. Look, get 10,000 starfish throwers and get them out there, and then we got to do this together, y'all. Yeah. You know, period. So God bless y'all. I love the whole spirit of Nyack. You know, I think about Nyack and I get happy. It makes me smile. And knowing guys like you, I'm filled with hope, Nathaniel. No kidding. I'm not just saying that.
No, we appreciate you, Mac, and thank you. We love you. We appreciate you. We're praying for you, and we just want to thank you once again for just doing this
Bless you.
With the center. So
bless you. Well, together we go forward, my brother.
Amen.
God bless.
God bless you too.
Thank you.